for students to have an opportunity to get their higher education in whatever field they wish or they desire. And I hope that it will be more adequately advertised, that students will become aware of it, and that the level of funding will always be adequate enough that those students who want to, that there will be funds available when students apply. I don't know, and we didn't get any information in terms of the performing loans, what level of difficulties the board has had in the past in terms of collecting loans. But that is an area that perhaps we could have heard a little more about and to get a little understanding as to how, as we proceed, how this is going to be controlled. Because while we understand the purpose of the fund in terms of enabling students, we also has, in my view, to see the fund being run and managed in a very business-like and professional way. And so therefore, I hope that as we go forward, proper measures will be put in place to make sure that the level of non-performing loans is not exceptionally high or large in relation to the overall fund, that it cannot continue to operate as it should. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sir, I do rise to support this bill. Sir, it's really good that government has taken the time to fix some of the issues that existed with the Student Revolving Loan Fund. Sir, and one of the biggest problems that existed was, I believe, failure to repay. Sir, I was fortunate in some way that the government paid for my tertiary education. But there were persons who, in my time, who, while mentally, sir, they would have qualified, financially, they could not afford to pay. And the student revolving loan was not available to them because of sureties. And there are still many persons who might wish to get a loan from the student revolving loan who might not be able to find a surety. We have been speaking, sir, about the blue economy, and I asked myself as I sat here, if a participant in the blue economy applied for a student revolving loan, would they be treated in the same way as someone who applied to do medicine, for example? And I dare say that they wouldn't. So even within the loan fund, sir, there is existing discrimination. So I hope that some of these changes will remove some of that. Sir, there's the matter, sir, of guarantors of loans. There is an age limit that is set, and that age limit has been set based on what one thought was the normal age of retirement. It played a role. The age of retirement has changed several times, and it continues to go drift upward, and people continue to earn in their retirement. And I wonder if we need to seriously look at whether that cutoff age needs to be adjusted with the possible ability of the guarantor to pay. Yes. Because I know what I mean when I say that there are many people who will not make it if they did not have access to a student revolving loan. And there are little things that will prevent access, that all the paperwork and all the structure will not fix. And your guarantors are very, very important. Sir, I wish to touch for a few minutes on where government invests in its people, and we expect, or we should expect, some return on the investment. One of my colleagues earlier said that when you are given in this way, you should give back. And I do not think that the issuing of scholarships and the fees that the government pays for education for persons with scholarships are radically different from paying a student revolving loan. And I think that while Senator Nurse's point is valid, that there's some professionals or some people who qualify in areas that we can't possibly employ, we need to make sure that those who receive benefits remember that they're supposed to give back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Maynard. Her Honour, Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Life is really very interesting. I remember when this fund was established during the Tom Adams administration. I was a teenager at the time, and I remember in I was about 23 at the time, so that would have been, I was born in 61. Pardon? No, it was established when I was a teenager, but I remember when I was about 23, sir. It had then been functioning for some time, and I wanted to go off to law school. And my father insisted that I go to the Student Revolving Loan Fund and get a loan because I was a woman. And that if I wanted to study law, I had to act with some degree of responsibility. I had to learn what it was like to face the bank or financial institutions. And I had to go and get a loan to put myself through law school. And it was nothing to do with him, and it had nothing to do with the fact that he could absolutely write the check for me to go. Life is so interesting, as I said, because I remember when his granddaughter was going off to study law in England, and he wrote a 6-figure check and put it in her bank account and told her to go. But poor me, I was in a different position. And I remember the day that I went very nervously to negotiate with the Student Revolving Loan Fund, a young girl of 23, never having faced any financial institution in my life, but my father trying to teach me a critical life lesson. And I remember the day, sir, because I was driving his car and I reversed it into a wall as I was leaving the Ministry of Education. I got the loan and went off to law school and came back. And as so many people do with this fund, I did not immediately pay back my loan. I am happy to say, sir, that I did pay every single cent that the taxpayers advanced to me. And I'm deeply grateful that they did. And I'm grateful that a government had the vision to create a fund of this type, because as others have remarked before me, there are people who, without it, would not have been able to pursue higher education or to pursue, the Student Revolving Loan Fund really finances dreams and futures. Really, that is what it does. It doesn't have any slogan, but if there were to be one, I think that is the slogan that we would have to attach. And it shows really what a visionary government can do, well-directed policy that is, in fact, transformational. And I'm grateful to be part of a parliament that will, again, redefine how this fund functions and the extent to which it acts as a lever for upward social mobility, for the transformation of fortunes and circumstances, and for truly changing the lives of families. I was the first person in my family, sir, to have a tertiary education. My parents were giddy with excitement when I entered university, and I suppose that at the time, I did not appreciate what it meant for two people who themselves had gone to what was then 7th standard, but not a traditional secondary school in the sense that we have, definitely not a university, to have a child who was entering the university to read for a degree in law. So I could not understand then the level of my parents' pride, but I understand now only too well that for people born in poverty in Barbados, that this is a mechanism which moves them from poverty toward the path of prosperity. I think that we have to ask ourselves, however, some questions that are coming to my mind. I will start, sir, on the point of sureties, because so many people have spoken to the issue of sureties and guarantors and so on. Like Senator Nurse, I would have liked to hear what kind of financing the fund started with, how it has grown over the course of its establishment, where it is now, and what projections the government is making within the context of the changes it is putting in place, because that would really allow us not just information, but to do critical analysis about how the fund is being used, how the government sees the fund, and how it is being positioned to be a tool for tertiary education that is perhaps in subjects and thematic areas not offered in the context of Barbados. As an attorney practicing, sir, I had been at one time one of the attorneys who was asked to collect monies from non-performing loans from those persons who were ministers of government, attorneys, doctors, all kinds of professionals in Barbados who were just not paying. And the fund got very annoyed with me because some of the people had gotten their money, started up practice, up and left the country, never paid a cent. You know, when you call them to talk to them, and it wasn't my thing to try to embarrass anybody, but you know these people, these are your fellow professionals. And you wanted to talk to them quietly and say, well, you know, you want to put yourself in order. And so they would start to tell me about their mortgage and their children and why they shouldn't pay back, and after all this time, why were they being pursued and so on. So it was very difficult to collect money. And I would therefore have been curious to know how we are strengthening our collection. I think that officers, I mean, you go in 23 for the first time to make a loan, and you know, they write you up and so, but nobody really sat down with me to explain to me what a revolving fund was. I really had no appreciation, truthfully, that if I did not pay, that I was in effect robbing somebody else of the same opportunity. When I came back, and they know when you leave and when you come back, because you're supposed to inform them, they know what you're studying and your period of study is, you should receive a letter and our phone call and our WhatsApp or an email to say, welcome back to Barbados. We were pleased to fund you. Please bear in mind that you have to start paying your loan in 6 months' time. Officer Jones will be calling you a month before your payments are supposed to start, so that there should be rigorous policing of the loan itself. And I don't care that commercial banks don't operate like that, but commercial banks will turn the screws on you in a way that the student revolving loan fund does not. And in fact, they can't, because you already got the education. You already have the training. It isn't as if they could come and pick up your motor car or take a lien on the property or something of the sort. You have the education. You are benefiting from the loan, and they cannot take that knowledge and power, the power that knowledge gives, away from you. So therefore, their mechanisms for policing that fund to ensure they get that money, staying in contact with the people. If the borrower does not hear you for 3 years, they're about to forget about you. But if they come in and they face you, or you are called in to face them and they're in contact and you are getting notices and so on, it becomes part of your planning. And in fact, in the same way that when you go to commercial entities and you have to give information on your assets and liabilities, they should ask whether or not you have a loan from the Student Revolving Fund and whether it is being paid. Because that may well act as an indicator of how they will treat your loan. It may not, because as I said, the banks tend to have means of collecting their monies that are far more aggressive, and in fact, you don't get the funding until you only get the funding at the time the contract is secured and you get the whatever it is right away. So it is perhaps not similar. And therefore, I would really like to see what is happening with sureties. And that is one of the reasons, given my experience as an attorney, having worked for the fund, that you could not ask me to act as a surety for anybody. Not given the level of delinquency that I saw from the people whom I saw. So that is perhaps the biggest barrier that the Student Revolving Loan Fund suffers. And this is being perfectly honest, sir. I don't know what is the level of top-up by the government or the level of capitalization, to use a more acceptable financial term, although I think everybody knows what I mean by top-up in this context. But this has been a major bugbear with the fund. What is the cost of education? And sir, I think that discussing this matter today opens up some other questions that are relevant to our circumstances. Barbadians like to talk about how much taxes they pay. If you have 2 children at university, and one is doing an arts degree and one is doing a science degree, you are paying, you are being supported, or your children are being supported and financed in their degrees. 2 children, one doing arts, one doing science, to the tune of $110,000 per year. You don't pay that amount of taxes. That has nothing to do with roads, has nothing to do with health care, has nothing to do with any of the other benefits that we as Barbadians enjoy, insist on, and will not give up, but do not want to pay for. So, and we are very fortunate in Barbados when the Barbados Labour Party took the decision to allow our people to go back to UWI at the taxpayers' expense. It was really a very progressive decision, because in countries all over the world, those who study and have to pay for it up front or pay as they go leave not only with their degree, but with debt that lasts 20 and 30 years, because the cost is so steep, particularly if they go to Ivy League universities. I did 2 masters at 2 different British universities. I know what it is like to max out my credit card, trying to buy all the books, and pay all of the fees that were required of me. So that we have to understand that education is expensive. It is not free. It has a very high cost. And the taxpayers treat our children with great generosity, some of whom are at Cave Hill indefinitely, switching programs and doing all kinds of things, just because mommy and daddy do not have to pay a cent of that $110,000 per year or $55,000 per year or more, depending on how many children they have at university and what programs they are doing. So we have to be conscious of the fact that this administration not only started the student revolving loan fund, but is now expanding its base as part of its support of, and we love to say poor black people, that the Labour Party does not support poor black people, but this allows poor black people to have education. It allows them to move from poverty into the middle class, and it really is a highly transformative tool, and that we are putting this in place in addition to free tertiary education or funded tertiary education. I prefer to say funded tertiary education rather than free tertiary education, because people may think it really is free when it is really very high value and very high cost. Funded tertiary education is, the government is to be commended, and I really want to support it. I believe that there are further questions that we need to ask, sir. And one such question for me is, what are we educating our people for? I will not say that some of the behaviors that you see really defy belief when you consider the level of education that people have. But I really want to ask a wider question. I'm really very serious. What is it that we are educating our people for? And by that, I mean, have we considered as a government what are our strategic priorities in the economy? Have we determined what our sources of foreign exchange and revenue earning are going to be? We have been talking about building new hotels, and they will open up several opportunities, not only in tourism, but for entrepreneurship, for people with management skills, for people who do things like massages and aesthetics, for people in food and supply, for agriculture. So every time you build a hotel, there is a direct and indirect impact in the tourism sector and outside of the tourism sector for all manner of sectors and persons conducting business. But my wider question is beyond tourism. We've heard about the establishment of a pharmaceutical industry, that Barbados is going to go into manufacturing with Rwanda as a partner, and this is good. But how are we going to expand our economy? What are going to be the new areas of endeavor and enterprise in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? What is the economy going to look like? What is our civil service going to look like? Is our civil service going to be an implementation agency, much as it is now? Is it going to be a regulatory force in a way that it is not currently? For instance, there are regulatory departments, so I could identify SSA as an implementation agency, and then I could identify the Environmental Protection Department or the Environmental Protection Agency as a regulatory agency. So are services going to be put out to the private sector while government plays the role of macro regulation, oversight, management, control, ensuring that the implementation is done in the way government intends. You see, it is only when we start to ask these kinds of questions can we determine what we are training people for to do, what the economy is going to look like, what skill sets and knowledge base do they have to propel the economy forward. We see happen in other jurisdictions where once the economy start to grow, because the training and education has not been commensurate in terms of the planning, that they have to start importing skills, people with all kinds of knowledge bases that the local economy does not have. And that creates a major us and them kind of thinking. So I commend government on the Gateway Initiative, for instance, where they are training people to fit them for the upcoming boom in tourism and construction. But at the same time, we now have to ask ourselves in the context of a knowledge economy, in a context of an economy, a global economy that is being driven increasingly by technology, by AI, by robotics. Sir, 2 weeks ago, I have to tell you, I got into a car. I tell everybody, sir, I got into a car, I drove, and then I came up alongside a vacant space, and the person salesman who was showing me the vehicle said, okay, press this button and it will tell the car to reverse itself. And I sat down in the car, and the car maneuvered, reversed itself, positioned itself perfectly in the spot, equidistant between the parallel white lines. Well, sir, I sat down at my old age in shock. Because, you know, you hear about these self-driving cars and this and that, but here in Barbados, to sit down, I actually experienced it. Mind you, I'd have to say the car was not as good as me, because I could have got into the spot in 1, but it did it in 3. But I was equidistant, it did the job. Yes, especially given that I drove into a wall yesterday, perhaps I should accept that. The car driving itself might not be, I'm into a wall again, might not be a bad thing. So the walls just come out of nowhere. I cannot figure out how they do it. Thankfully, I drive a very hardy car, so. But the point that I'm making, sir, is that the world as we knew it is changing. It is being changed by technology. The workplace as we know it is being changed by a changing labor, the way the technology is transforming the labor force and the marketplace. It is being changed by the rise and rapid growth of the gig economy and a whole number of other factors. So the question is, in terms of our education, how are we projecting the skill sets that we are going to need? Because very often I find that when you apply for loans, that if you say you want to do things like, what is it that the Most Honorable Corey Ford studied? Trying to remember, I can't. But he would have studied something that was very, very unusual at the time. It wasn't what we were accustomed to with, sorry, what's that? Infectious diseases. There were not people studying infectious diseases at the time. And therefore, when he would have applied for this, his own scholarship, or when he would have thought to do that, you know, the whole question of, is this a skill that we are going to need? Well, infectious diseases, some people get colds. I mean, we're talking about, nobody could have anticipated COVID. So young people are now looking to study a whole range of things that perhaps mean very little to you and me, or perhaps not relevant. The skills or the lens or criteria or yardstick that those granting the loans for these unusual areas are using are the traditional yardsticks, because they do not even understand what these new areas of endeavor mean and what they mean to the economy. Now, I cite the Most Honorable, the Most Honorable Corey Ford, because when you think of what he would have studied when, and when then it really became essential to the economy. So I'm just citing him as an example of a skill set that at the time he would have done his training, really somebody may have questioned what is the relevance of this to the Barbados economy. Well, you don't go and do dentistry or gynecology or something that somebody out here could use. So we have to be able, in screening people who are coming to the fund, to do things that might be unusual, we have to be able to bring information to bear on screening them and what it could mean for the economy, and a new understanding of the implications of the jobs that are available now and that are going to be available down the road, even if they're not available now. It also then raises the question of something to which either Senator Nurse or Senator Maynard alluded, and that is the question of studying for something where you cannot immediately return to Barbados because the opportunity to practice in your field is narrow. I think that in some instances we have to take chances on these people because they are going to use their skills in ways that will help somewhere else. They are going to repatriate benefits. If we can get them to pay and to agree to pay their loans, that becomes the most important thing, because education and knowledge are not wasted. And at some point, we may very well be able to repatriate a highly skilled Barbadian who may be operating at the highest levels in the international sphere, where we did not immediately have a need for him, except to tell somebody who is a biochemist, for instance, all right, see if you could get into Harrison College and teach for chemistry or something, but who may then be part of your new pharmaceutical industry once the opportunity opens up. So what is the economy going to look like? How is it going to grow? What are the sectors by which it is going to grow, I beg your pardon. These are the kinds of questions. What is the optimal size of the Barbados Civil Service? We have been making adjustments in respect of civil service reform, but I do not know that that tinkering over many years has been done except within the edicts of meeting international financial criteria. But really we should be asking ourselves, what is the optimal size of our civil service? What is this civil service to be trained to do? What kind of skill sets do we want them to have, and planning in that way? It makes me then ask the question, to what extent is there needs planning between government and the university? Now, I encountered a young lady who was very angry with the government. And all she is telling me is that she studied journalism and cannot get a job. And I said to her, well, how many graduates in journalism were there in your year? Can't remember what the number she told me. I said, we have The Nation. We have The Advocate. It was open at the time. You have VOB, and I went through all the media houses. The radios are increasingly using DJs as opposed to the traditional announcer. I was trained as an announcer in VOB. I thank God that I trained with people like Julian Rogers and Linda Walron and Alison Seeley-Smith and Alfred Pragnell and others, because, you know, it impacted the way I spoke. It impacted my use of language. But then people go on. It is bare DJs on the radio now, and a lot of them do not speak English. In fact, they appear to be unable to speak English. English is their foreign language. Bajan is their first. That's a fact, sir. FSCK. It is a fact, sir. No, it is very distressing sometimes when you listen to them, you get very agitated. Because when young people listen to them or going to the common entrance or write the nonsense that they hear these people speaking, they will be failed on their common entrance papers. Sorry, DJs, I like the music, but when I gotta speak English though. You must speak English though. 3 minutes, sir. The point that I was making is that, what was I saying? Right. This young lady, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I'm glad you were listening. At least you were. This young lady could not get a job. And I was saying to her, but when there are 20 graduates in your class this year, you have 10 media houses in Barbados, 6 of which are going to be using DJs to do their work, and another 4 who may have their full complement of journalists. Where did you think you were going to work? No answer. So our young people, there is no needs planning between the university and the government, and no projection of the skill sets that you need. So people are just saying, you know, man, I like X, and therefore they go and study X without any consideration for when they graduate, what is the scope of them getting employment for the degree or the degree combination, if it's dual or multiple things, or the single subject degree that they have. I believe that it is all right for countries like the UK, like the USA, although that seems now to be shrinking the USA, where you have multiple universities and large numbers of people coming from overseas to complement your local population and your local economy to train in other areas. But in a region as small as the Caribbean, where your economies are small, your populations are small, you have to do far more needs planning and better understand what is happening in your marketplace, where your economies are going, and what needs you need to meet in order to be able to give people jobs, or for people to have jobs beneficially and make a beneficial contribution as well as earn an income. I am pleased that this complements the government's efforts. When we came to government in 1994, the SJPP, BCC, and UE, the intake at SJPP, for instance, and BCC were doubled. There have been increased further since then. UE has been increased exponentially, and as I said, for Barbadians, it has remained without charge. I believe, sir, in the time left with me, the 2 minutes, sir. Yeah, you said I had 3 and I only used half. I really want to say very briefly that despite the fact that our women are the majority of the graduates from the University of the West Indies, that they are still the majority of the unemployed in Barbados, there are still the majority of people who live in poverty, there are still the majority of those who are last to be hired, and that we really need to do an analysis of that. Clearly, I don't have the time to speak to it in any greater degree, given the fact that my time has gone, which I accept, sir. So I am pleased to support this measure. I believe that the Student Revolving Loan Fund, as I indicated earlier, finances dreams and futures, and I am deeply grateful for how it helped me, and I hope very much that the changes that are have been made, and the suggestions made by other honorable senators today will see it grow further and benefit a wider swath of Barbadians, allowing them to enjoy increased opportunity, increased income, and a better quality of life. It is not an accident that this country has the largest number of people in the middle class in Barbados. It is by deliberate policy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Your Honour. The Most Honourable Senator Thompson. Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wasn't going to speak on this bill, until about half an hour, about half an hour ago. Actually, no, I'm going to be a very short presentation. This presentation, Mr. Chair, within my allocated time, I'm not going over, and I'm quarreling with other people for hustling me. Mr. President.
You don't have to read it, Mr. President.
Mr. President, it's really an appeal to Barbadian parents and to Barbadian young people. I've sat and listened to my colleagues here in the Senate talk about their experiences with the Student Revolving Loan Fund. I too stand here in this place as someone who also raised by a single parent, went through the system, went off to university. The government paid my tuition fees, but in order to go overseas, there had to be the financing to allow me to pay for my accommodation and all of those kinds of things. So I too had a student revolving loan. I too had to pay it back. I too made sure that I paid it back. I too, like Senator Thompson, once you come back in, you have a moratorium, usually the first year or so, and then you start paying it back. All of us in here, in this place, have had that experience based on what I have heard today. But, Mr. President, the question of the philosophy of what the Student Revolving Loan Fund is meant to do via education, which is to create a pathway and finance dreams and income mobilization, moving people from one income class into the other, income mobility, is very much why I stood to speak today, Mr. President. This country historically has had access to education made available to us through funded education. Free education is what Senator Thompson talked about, but I like the term funded education. It is free at the point of consumption, but it is not free. Somebody pays for it, usually the taxpayers. But here's what I rose to say today, Mr. President. Beyond the middle class, beyond those persons like us who have gone through the Student Revolving Loan Fund to be able to finance undergraduate degrees, postgraduate degrees, doctoral degrees, and other specialist kinds of degrees. This country also has a philosophy of financing technical and vocational training and providing free training programs for persons who don't need necessarily to go through all the formalities of applying to a university and all that kind of stuff. Mr. President, I rose because as I sat and I listened to all of us speak about the various degrees that we have each pursued and all of the opportunities that have made available to us because of it, I couldn't help but think about the people who I met over the last week who are mechanics, who are drainage professionals, who clean the drainage networks underneath the street, who have no formal university education, who in some instances have put bulk and brawn into their livelihood. That's how they earn a living. But there is an opportunity, whether it is in the SJPI or the construction gateway that Senator Thompson spoke about, training people to work in the construction industry, plumbers, masons, tilers, people who, when I watch them, I can't do what they do. I don't know where to start. What they do is impressive. It's incredible work that is necessary. And when we went through COVID, I think we all learned as a country that what is defined as an essential worker is very different to what we thought. There are categories of work, skill, professions in this country that need now to be elevated in ways that we have historically not done. And this appeal that I stood to make today is for Barbadian parents in particular, to put your children in a position where they can take advantage of the free education opportunities that have been made available to them. If you are not a student who wants to go through the system and go to BCC or go to University of the West Indies at the expense of the taxpayers, but you are a student who could sit down and do an online course at a National Transformation Initiative and be able to get a couple of skills that will allow you to have a higher income earning capacity, do that. If you are a student who is great with your hands, who is a mechanic, who is somebody who is skilled and who could pick out anything and put it back together. Put your children and encourage them to apply to the Construction Gateway program. Encourage them to apply for skills, because every last one of the colleagues, Mr. President, who spoke in here today talked about them pursuing dreams, growing the middle class, increasing their income earnings. The only way that I know to increase your income earnings legally is by earning qualifications, acquiring a skill, and being able to command higher wages and salaries. This country has too many free training programs or finance training programs for so many young people to be saying that they can't find work. And that these programs, in so many instances, are undersubscribed. We're not taking advantage of all of the opportunities that have been made available to us. It is an opportunity. As we talk about the Student Revolving Loan Fund, I couldn't let the day pass without standing to my feet to say and appeal to Barbadians. Also, in addition to the arsenal that is the Student Revolving Loan Fund, take advantage of the free training that the government has made available to you. Use it to your advantage. Your dreams, your aspirations are wrapped up in skills. Spend the time, sacrifice, even if it is an hour, 2 hours, a couple weeks at a time. It doesn't have to be a 3-year degree or a 4-year degree. It doesn't have to be a doctorate. Everybody has something that they're gifted with. Everybody has something that they're good at. Find that thing, access your training programs, use your training programs, get a skill, and let us all finance dreams and fund dreams through the taxpayer's purse by way of the government, who has already made these things available to you. And with these few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummins. Senator, the Honourable Dr. Munro Knight.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me thank all of the honourable senators that have contributed to this afternoon's debate. It was a rich debate, again, stressing the importance of education, stressing the importance of this particular facility as well. And I think everything that has been said here today, in many respects, answered some of the queries as well that were put on the table as the different interventions unfolded. I wanted to provide some measure of assuredness to the Senator Andre Worrell and others, I believe, who raised the question of whether or not the Student Revolving Loan Fund was paying attention to vocational training as well. So if you go on the Student Revolving Loan Fund site, you would see, Mr. President, that there is provision for access to funding for adult vocational education, post-secondary technical education as well, and in those areas as well as graduate and undergraduate studies. So that before, as I said in my presentation, where there was a focus on the traditional areas, the Student Revolving Loan Fund has made sure that it has embraced those technical and vocational areas as well for investment for Barbadians to also as well participate. There was a question, Mr. President, as well by Senator Worrell, which had to do with the composition of the board and the extent to which the composition of the board could make sure that the Student Revolving Loan Fund kept on the cutting edge of where the global economy was going, and to ensure that its portfolio, again, in terms of what it was offering, remained relevant. I just want to point out, Mr. President, if we look at the first schedule, even though the Accreditation Council, and the Accreditation Council is what Senator Worrell would have referenced specifically, the first schedule there, which speaks to the constitution of the board, we note that it does have a representative of the Ministry of Finance and Planning, as well, a representative of the Cave Hill campus of the University of the West Indies, and a representative of the Barbados Institute of Management and Productivity, nominated by the Executive Director of the Institute, and then 4 persons appointed by the Minister. So that even though there is not a specific reference to the Accreditation Council itself, the indication of these other members, the University of West Indies, BIMAC, and then provision as well for the minister to also appoint persons will provide some surety that we will make sure that we have a board of directors that bring all of the necessary skills and experience. As well, again, if you go on the Student Revolving Loan Fund website, you would note that the Student Revolving Loan Fund has 3 specialist programs, one on cybersecurity, one on AI, and then also as well on digital transformation. And that program on cybersecurity and on AI, I think the cybersecurity program would have started in 2023. And I think the AI program perhaps coming on at the end of 2023 into 2024. So these, again, are recent programs that is demonstrating that the Student Revolving Loan Fund is looking to where the future is going. I know that the Deputy Speaker, Deputy President, we all get a speaker and chairman and everything. I don't know what happened in the water today, Mr. President. Would have asked about, where the future is going, where the job market is going. But I think what we are trying to do here in this bill with changing up how the board is configured, making sure that we have the right people on the board, bringing to front the whole issue of how we plan is an important part to making sure that we can identify those trajectories and then be able to match the portfolio of the Student Revolving Loan Fund and what it provides and what it funds, that there is the necessary match. There was a question, again, that came from Senator Nurse, as well also referenced as well by the Deputy President in relation to the portfolio of the Student Revolving Loan Fund, and in particular its ability to recover the debts there, particularly for loans that are in arrears. I would have indicated in my presentation, and I will repeat, that we had a very, very large, what I would say is insolvency or high debt portfolio for the Student Revolving Loan Fund. That by the late, when it first started out, we had almost 90% of non-performing loans. Yeah, 90% of non-performing loans. By the late 1980s. By the 2000s, that moved from 90% to 60%. Mr. President, I think I would have referenced 64%. The number is 60%. By 2013, arrears then moved to 47. So we went from 90 to 60 to 47%. And as I would have indicated, by the end of March, it is now 11%. And with the aim as well, thank you, Mr. President, yes, we can clap for that. And by the end, with the aim that delinquency portfolio moves down to 5%, Mr. President. Mr. President, I can also as well invite all of the honorable members, as Senator Nurse would have indicated, the Student Revolving Loan Fund, make sure that it publishes all of its audited financial reports, so they're actually on the website. You can go and see. And as well, it provides information, again, as was requested, on the extent of its debt collection. And I want to read, Mr. President, from the report ending for March 31st, 2023. And with your permission, Mr. President, so I'm reading from that audited financial statement that is available on the website. And it indicates that the...
Just be sure to make it a document of the House if it's not. Has it been laid in the Parliament already?
This is... So I cannot speak to whether or not it's been made.
You need to make it a document of the House if you're going to...
Mr. President,
And what year is it, again, for the record?
2022, 2023.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. The report indicates that the remarkable level of net income generated in the financial year referenced in the report 2023 can be attributed mainly to the consistent management of the fund's arrears portfolio, resulting in the considerable number of loans being reclassified either as being current or in lower risk category. And it notes that this has translated into a reduction of 7.36 million in the loan loss provision for the year under review, and this has had a positive impact, Mr. President. So this would suggest, and although I cannot therefore provide the specific measures that certainly the Student Revolving Loan Fund is doing well in order to make sure that it addresses, again, both non-performing loans and to aid in collection, which has resulted in a positive impact in the situation of the fund over time, to the extent now that it is in a position of profit, Mr. President. But I do also want to note that, again, because I have been a surety for a number of persons, would note that, well, not number of persons, it can be one at the same time, but more than one person, that I have received quite a few notices, Mr. President, which would say either that they're, as was indicated, coming up to the end, even a little bit of an arrears as well. They would provide a number for me to call, because I did have a situation in which somebody that I had signed for surety was delinquent, and they would have sent me a number of notices in relation to whether they would have called, what would have been the response, what I would need to do in terms of further information, and then the risk as well. And we would know as well that Senator Boyce would have indicated that right on the website of Student Revolving Loan Fund, there is a video, Senator Nurse, providing education, and Senator Maynard, on what it means and the implications to be a surety for the Student Revolving Loan Fund. So I think that it has been recognized, the need for greater education, and that there is an attempt in order to be able to address that. Sorry, to ensure that people fully understand those obligations as well. I believe that, Deputy Madam President, you would have raised some overarching questions that I think are perhaps part of a larger national debate in terms of how we position education and our economy. I do note that the Ministry of Labour, Social Security and the Third Sector, I think it was in 2022, would have undertaken a labour market survey, looking again at the trends that were happening in the global market and where we are. Just as you were speaking, I would have gone onto the Ministry of Labour's website. I would have noted that you can find information on the graduates that are coming out from all of the tertiary institutions, from the college, SJPI, the subjects that they are undertaking, also as well with attempting to match, not globally, I don't think we've gotten there yet, at least based on the information that was available, but attempting to be able to make sure that we can actually map what our students are coming out, the qualifications that they have as well, what is happening, linking that with information from the National Insurance, again, to provide a holistic frame of what was happening within the job market locally. But I would agree then that we need to do more just to kind of move that. But like I said, I do know that there was a recent study that was done in order to try to attempt to be able to do that. And that is also part of the work that happens within the social partnership as well. But agreeing that we need to have a larger debate amongst these issues. Mr. President, I believe that I have attempted to, as much as possible, respond in a holistic way to what has been raised, and as well, of course, the call from the Leader of Government Business that people take advantage of the opportunities that are available. Mr. President, I do know that, and I agree, there are a number of opportunities. For some reason, again, because we have that narrow frame of education that stops, for the most part, at secondary level, many young people do not take up the opportunities that are afforded, and not just, Mr. President, to go and do the traditional education. There are a number of courses offered on Coursera, for instance, there, that allow people to take courses free, and accredited, again, by international universities, but also as well very practical courses as well that can allow you to immediately then fit into the current job market. Through the Ministry of Youth, for instance, the Block Transformation Project, Project Dawn, offers a number of free courses right across. So traditionally where you would have to go, for instance, even at BCC and pay, or if you want to do any nursing courses, etc., under the Project Dawn, you have free access. And Project Dawn actually also offers you a stipend to go. You get a stipend, to go, and all of your materials are covered. We also have Construction Gateway. And and I know that people say the instant thing is that you want a job. We want a job. We want everybody to be able to be gainfully employed. But the competitiveness of the market means also that we need to be able to scale up. We have to be able to scale up. And that has to, again, like we did earlier in the discussion, has to be something that an individual also as well has to take responsibility for, even as much as government can provide all of the necessary resources that it can to be able to do so. So the provision of the government to provide the resources must also be met by the individual responsibility. Mr. President, and with those words, and I hope that I have responded to all of the queries on the table, I beg that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg that Your Honor do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into the committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honorable Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honourable the Senate is now in committee.
Madam Deputy President, do I have your permission to take the bill in parts?
Yes, you do.
Clauses 1 to 15.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that clauses 1 to 15 do now stand part.
Question is that clauses 1 through 15 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clauses 16 to 33.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that clauses 16 to 33 do now stand part.
The question is that clauses 16 through 33 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The first schedule.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be now the first schedule to the bill. All honourable senators in favour please say aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The second schedule.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be now the second schedule to the bill. All honourable senators in favour please say aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Report.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Of those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. Meetings, the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the Act be now cited as the Student Revolving Loan Fund Act 2025. Now pass, sorry. That this bill be now passed and be cited as the Student Revolving Loan Fund Act 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Student Revolving Loan Fund Act 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 9, sir. In the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Supreme Court of Judicature Amendment and Validation Bill 2025.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is probably going to be my shortest presentation of a bill ever. This is an amendment and a validation in one. In the first instance, the bill before us attempts to create for the insertion of a new section 36A, which is what is in the document. This section specifically is meant to provide for the court to order a party to any proceedings to pay an interim payment to another party. Currently, in the existing legislation, there is no such power that exists, and so this section that has now been inserted, one, not only allows for the provision to be inserted, but it validates any previous orders that were made for interim payments in order to make those validation orders, to make those payments that were ordered valid. Thirdly, the bill also makes an amendment to the first schedule of the Act. So in the first instance, you have the insertion of a new section 36A, and then you have an amendment to the first schedule of the existing legislation, which now provides for hearings of proceedings connected to the Companies Act to be heard by the Commercial Division of the Supreme Court. So these are the three matters for the consideration of this honorable chamber. One, the insertion of new 36A to allow for the provision for interim orders to be made and paid to parties to a proceeding before the court. Two, to validate any such payments that have previously been ordered. And three, to allow for a schedule to be amended for the proceedings heard by the Commercial Division of the Supreme Court to be made applicable. And this is the matter before the Honorable Senate, and I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Any speakers? Senator Kevin Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sir, the two aspects of the legislation which we're discussing are separate and are somewhat related. One deals with the rules of the Supreme Court in relation to interim payments. The other deals with the utilization of the Commercial Division of the Supreme Court. I intend to touch on both aspects this evening. It is after 5. Now, sir, lawyers, believe it or not, have these guiding principles where they speak about primary and subsidiary legislation. What we're debating today, the Supreme Court Act, is called a primary piece of legislation. So it empowers certain things, it grants certain rights. Subsidiary legislation, what you call rules, gives effect to the primary legislation, but subsidiary legislation doesn't have certain powers. So When we were talking earlier today, sir, in relation to the other piece of legislation, which everybody was talking about tint, and we were saying what it really is to deal with the penalty, that's a subsidiary legislation. What we're debating today in terms of the Supreme Court Act is a primary legislation. And this primary legislation is being amended because the government, recognizing recent decisions coming out of the courts, have said that they need to specify the power to make interim payments. Now, Mr. President, interim payments are payments that are made in the course of a trial. Practitioners will tell you that it's been going on for over 30 years throughout the Caribbean. And because of decisions coming from other Caribbean islands and decisions which have been made locally, it was determined that the basis on which these interim payments were being made was not authentic. In other words, they were being made based on the inherent powers of the court. Now, the inherent powers of the court are the inherent powers of the judge to do certain things which descend from common law or based on your interpretation of the primary legislation. Remember the distinction I gave, sir, which is the Supreme Court of Judicature Act. It seems as though, coming out of a case called the Jamaat al-Muslimin in Trinidad, and in desperate efforts to find a way for payments not to be made, but that's an aside, it was determined that interim payments ought not to have been made because, not because of who it was that was receiving it, the subsidiary legislation right to do it really did not have that power, and it should have come from the primary legislation, which is the Supreme Court of Judicature Act. That issue was raised in the courts of Barbados, and long story short, a determination made that we need to amend our Supreme Court of Judicature Act to expressly give the right to make interim payments. I believe that's the nicest, shortest way to describe what we're dealing with. There have, however, been a number of interim payments that have been awarded by the courts previously for matters dealing with personal injury being the most common cause, in that while matters meander through our system, and you would have heard in previous presentations by a number of speakers in here how long that takes, the interim payment remedy was seen as an opportunity to get some funding for the victim before the case comes to a conclusion. Now, I must say, sir, that I do not practice personal injury law, so if I need to be corrected, I'm sure I will be. So long story short, sir, what we're dealing with is legislation to specifically provide within the Supreme Court of Judicature Act the ability to make interim payments and to preserve certain previous interim payments that have been made. The rules which come out of the Supreme Court of Judicature Act were last majorly overhauled in 2008. So we're coming up on, let's say, 20 years within 3 years, sir. Those rules have been subject to a number of judicial interpretations. They have been what we call lucanas, I hope I pronounced that correctly, areas which need to be clarified within them, and they are constantly being interpreted, reinterpreted, and considered by judges. But then again, sir, if it was obvious and simple, certain persons in here would not have a job. The rules themselves, however, govern the actions before the court, and litigators are always urged to stay on top of them, and if they don't, they suffer the natural consequences. Now, sir, we can't have a discussion about the Supreme Court or the Supreme Court rules and the commercial division, which I'll come to shortly, without, of course, having a discussion with how the court is currently going. I like to make my utterances in terms of what the courts need or what they should be granted. I actually can tell a story that one judge thanked me and then ruled against me. So there's no bias in terms of what is being done. But sir, before I get into detail, let's talk about the commercial court, wherein the concept is, the commercial division, is supposed to handle matters of a certain significance, and you heard the leader of government business say anything to do with the Companies Act. Now, this all ties in, of course, to the whole, I assume, government's intention to make Barbados all this lovely stuff in terms of how we operate, doing business, and all the necessary terms to show that we are an efficient society in terms of doing certain commercial transactions. And I'm sure everyone will refer to the data that shows that if persons are unable to resolve disputes in a quick manner through the court system, it then results in lowered investment within the region. So, commercial division is established, I think, a few years back, along with the family. No, family was before, but it's supposed to be family, civil, and commercial, in terms of the divisions of the High Court. So family, as it says, deals with family matters, civil deals with regular civil dispute, and commercial is supposed to deal with certain types of matters, as we see the determination being made with matters with regard to the Companies Act. And these matters, Mr. President, you will well be aware, are not sexy at all, and deal with companies and directors and shareholders and rights and oppression and all the different aspects of which, you know, it does provide a decent living, but it comes at a price wherein you are forced to argue areas of law that nobody besides maybe Senator Nurse will be too interested in as you wax poetic as to various rights and wherewithal. But I digress, sir. Sir, long story is that we cannot have a discussion about this legislation without perhaps looking at how the courts are currently doing. So I intend to have a bit of a conversation or presentation about that. On the positive side, sir, all the lawyers, we are back in physical court. We attend as instructed. We are there for 9:30, and we argue our cases as directed. I am reliably informed that there's been an improvement in the speed of probate matters with the online filing system, and that they have been making great leaps in that area. I can say that online filing, Mr. President, is a go. We are online filing matters. There's some hiccups, one thing, but online filing is a go. And there are certain elements of the civil courts where decisions are coming fast and furious. Some will say too fast and too furious, but there are certain aspects of it where decisions are being pumped out. And there has been some improvement in parking, sir. Now, I don't know if you recall, Mr. President, but there was a time where lawyers were actually, I wouldn't say protesting, but drawing the media's attention of the inability to get parking within the judicial complex. Now, on the negative side of this scale, sir, we are dealing with a situation where, as of today, the scanner is not working when you enter into the building. Now, this is obviously a security concern, and the officers there do their jobs checking the bags manually, but that cannot be the best that we could do in a situation where we have judges sitting, I guess I can call them criminals or accused persons attending matters. You have jurors, you have lawyers, you have a variety of persons, and the actual scanning system in which the bags pass through is not working. To me, that's a security risk, but I'm assured, whatever, hopefully that will be expedited and resolved. I said we were back in physical court as a positive, but it's also a negative. We are now back in the traffic, back to get into court, and we have lost all those lessons that we learned the hard way in COVID. Especially for the new commercial court, we do not, I say, need to be physically at court to argue these dry, mundane matters until the stage of taking evidence. It is efficient to utilize the online or the hybrid facilities, and certain jurisdictions in the region continue to do so. Why do we not utilize these tools? Why do we insist that practitioners leave their office, attend to the court, and people are charged, because most people charge now based on the time it takes. And then you sit at court and you have to wait until your matter is called, if it's called. So we've lost the benefit. We dealt with matters during COVID. The judges were extremely efficient online. This is something that I suggest, sir, especially for the commercial court, that should be examined. Sir, I said the online filing was working. That's what I said on the positive side. But on the negative side, even though the online filing is working, you still have to bring physical copies of the documents that you file online to the registry. So you have to do your online filing digitally, and then you print out your physical copy. It's true, Mr. President. You print out your physical copy and you take it to the registry because there's not, I understand, they don't have the printers and the necessary stuff to print the documents for, however. So you do online filing, but you still have to provide physical copies. That to me seems to be
foolishness is the word.
not in keeping with the whole concept of online filing, sir. Okay? I have a note here that says a cart before the horse type of scenario.
Does that mean foolishness?
Sir, there continues to be an issue with getting hearing dates for certain type of matters, especially if it's a matter where a temporary judge was appointed and is no longer there. So if your matter is tracked before a judge, because they have different systems, they have fancy names, gems, and all type of thing, that the matters were controlled by a specific judge. Because you had temporary judges, and the temporary judges are no longer there, temporary, the matter exists in a state of abeyance, in which despite efforts to prompt the personnel to have it assigned, some of them still remain in what we call the purgatory, sir. Now, there are matters when they are assigned to a judge who is permanent, move within that judge's bosom. The problem is not all matters are like that. Sir, getting decisions, I said some were coming fast and furious, but in everything in life there's a balance. Some are not coming at all. Some have been outstanding for years, sir. So it was a near holiday amongst the practitioners where over 20-something decisions were given in one day. Now, some will argue about the decisions or whatever, but the decisions were given. And that's why we have a court of appeal, so when, however you feel about a decision, you can deal with it someplace else. But that is not the norm, sir. And the concept and the issue with decisions remaining outstanding remains. Sir, despite what I would say is some public's perception, our judges are working. I just came from occupying a court where the judicial officer was supposed to be on vacation, but because they were saddled with an urgent injunctive matter, there was no vacation. We took up 3-4 weeks of the time. The question remains resources to allow these type of matters to be dealt with efficiently while allowing the judicial officers the time to give decisions. Because if they're hearing matters all the time, they're not in a position to give the decisions. And I say this without fear or favor because, as I told you, sir, I was thanked and I was ruled against. At the end of the day, I'm glad that Minister Reid, Senator Minister Reid is here. We really have to look at the uptake of technology. Sir, the civil/commercial judges are still taking notes by longhand. They're still writing notes. If your point is sensible, if they're writing, we have the technology to record what is being said. When we were doing the matters online, teams would say, hey, you finished this presentation, here's your statement of all the things that were said. The digital uptake, and I know Senator Reid said he will champion this cause, needs to be pushed. We can utilize the AI transcript tools without replacing people. We can utilize the transcript recording tools without replacing persons. And we can have a system where recording is done if the judges are given the technology. And the technology therefore allows, sir, we've had a situation, the same matter, in which for whatever reason, lawyers are people, so someone might deny what they've said. But there's no transcript as to what was said. So you're looking at your second chair to say, well, read that note back, if you're lucky. So this is the type of issue which will make resolving matters faster. Again, I go back to the issue of the commercial court. If we are in a commercial court, sir, and I am arguing about the efficacy of a bond, or a piece of paper to determine what the rights are. I'm not looking for, judicial officer doesn't need to see the reaction. There's no witness. We are interpreting a piece of paper. We can do these things using the technology. We have the experience, we have the data, we have an enthusiastic new member of the Senate and minister. Why not lean into this thing? The problems that we're facing, sir, despite how they seem, to me, are not insurmountable. It really takes a case, I think, of financing, which I understand the difficulty, and will. Judicial determination is not sexy. Solving commercial problems is not sexy. But it is a reality which is impacting matters on the ground. If we increase the speed of resolving these commercial issues, it would endow the economic benefit to the country. I think all of us are on the same page where that is a necessary step which needs to be taken to improve or continue to improve the administration of justice in this country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. Any other speakers? You have to raise, I can't read your mind. You just have to stand your order, say you stand on your feet so you can speak clear, you want to speak. Thank you. Senator Gregory Nichols.
Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to speak on the bill. I want to lend my voice to some of the comments made by Senator Boyce in relation to the importance of this legislation filling the gap. This bill, when passed today, Mr. President, will make provision for the provision in the law to make, for the High Court, to have the jurisdiction to make interim payment orders. Importantly, it would validate a number of orders made by the courts before. We have had this problem precisely because in January 2022, the Court of Appeal handed down a decision in which it made very clear that the court does not have the jurisdiction to make orders for interim payments. It created shockwaves, not only in the legal system, but also within the insurance sector, because many people who have suffered from road traffic accidents or work-related accidents were receiving interim payments to pay for their medical bills, treatment, et cetera, We're getting this support from insurance companies, and all of a sudden this stopped overnight because the court ruled that when we look at the law of Barbados, there is nothing that authorizes the court to make an interim payment. And the members of the public might question why this is so, but the truth is that the interim payment basically means that the court is giving you some money on account of the damages that you are likely to get at the end of the matter before the matter concludes. So that is why it is an interim payment. So in January, the Court of Appeal made a decision that the High Court doesn't have jurisdiction. And by May 9th, 2025, the bill was laid in this Parliament. And to respond to that lacuna in the law, the gap between where the law is and what the practice among the judges and lawyers has been for many years. And I think Senator Boyce said 30 years, but I'm sure the ability of the court to grant interim payments goes back longer than 30 years, perhaps even 50 or 60 years. It has been a feature of justice in which the courts look at the matter before it, and judges have routinely granted interim payments. And it is not any matter that can get an interim payment, because almost in all of the cases, judges would only grant an interim payment where liability between the claimant and the defendant is not in dispute. So where there is a dispute between who caused the accident, whether it's at work or whether it's on the roads, you're not likely to get an interim payment because the court is unable at an early stage of the matter to determine where the matter will go. So it has almost always been in a situation, Mr. President, where the parties have no disagreement as to who is at fault. So the defendant knows that in end, I am likely to have to pay, these damages, and it would be better if I pay early because interest attracts to the awards of damages from the date of the filing of the claim in any event, so you pay up front. Now, the purpose of it is to make sure, as I said, the injured party or the claimant does not stay out of their money for too long. And we understand that the interim payments, as said by Senator Boyce, has been an important weapon in the armory of the courts to do justice at an early stage of the matter. And people lose their earnings, people have to expend money and meet future expenses. We all as lawyers experience a situation where medical bills mount up, and this is the only way that they can get the medical treatment that is necessary to put them in a better place. Sir, it is important to understand why government is coming with this amendment and validation. The Court of Appeal accepted the argument that the High Court had no jurisdiction to grant or make orders of interim payments, even though the courts for many decades have done so. And principally, the court is basically saying that the defendant can only be ordered to pay after the full matter has been adjudicated. Now, some practitioners, some lawyers have argued that this is a troublesome ruling by the Court of Appeal because presently, if you go to the Supreme Court of Judicature Act, Section 82 says that the Rules Committee can make rules that make provision for an interim payment, so that there is a mention of an interim payment in the law. It says that the Rules Committee can make rules to provide for interim payments. And certainly the CPR, the Civil Procedure Rules, is an example of such a rule making provision for interim payments. The Court of Appeal, however, accepted that there is, or the argument was presented on behalf of the appellant in that case, that there was a difference between the existence of the power to make the interim payment, which is the jurisdiction to make it, and the regulation of that power. So that is the argument accepted by our Court of Appeal. Some would say that is a distinction without a difference. It was found that, and the court uses this language coming out of a case from Jamaica, that the base metal of the Civil Procedure Rules cannot, by judicial alchemy, convert or produce the goal of conferring substantive rights. So that you can't use the procedural rules, which detail, in essence, how you make the applications for interim payments to create the right to an interim payment. Many legal contemporaries, or my legal contemporaries, Mr. President, have hailed this bill as timely and welcome its passage through the House. And while I understand the reasoning of the Court of Appeal and agree that there's no statutory basis for the court to make an order for interim payment, and while I support the bill before the House, I really don't accept what really is the court's reasoning when you flesh it out, that that the Barbadian courts have been getting it wrong for many years, or that the courts have been acting unlawfully. I don't accept that in granting an interim payment, the courts have been wrong. I say that because, Mr. President, the Barbados courts were applying the law of Barbados. The judge-made law of Barbados, in the same way the judge-made law of England, where judges can address matters that come before the courts routinely in England, which have not been addressed by the Houses of Parliament in England, but the judges can deal with the matter and render a judicial decision that is fair and just. We call it the common law, which was received when Sir William Courtine and his men landed in Barbados in 1627 as part of the laws of Barbados. So the common law, which is the judge-made law of England, has been received as the laws of Barbados, and until this sovereign parliament makes law, the common law of England applies in Barbados. It still does. So my challenge with the decision is that it accepts the view that there's nothing called Barbadian law or, for example, Caribbean law, that our judges cannot make a judicial determination on a matter to render a just and a fair outcome for the litigants before it. And Mr. President, that is the only problematic aspect of the decision. And it is problematic because we are now, Mr. President, 60 years into independence within the Caribbean. The law faculty has been in existence for almost 50 years. The Caribbean Court of Justice is now approaching 20 years as our highest third-tier appellate court. And the jurisprudence that has emanated from Caribbean societies speak to the lived reality of Caribbean people. And not all of the English concepts can fit within our own reality. And that is a fact. And several instances have occurred where our parliaments have had to remedy and ameliorate the situation where the English law has not resolved or cannot resolve, in essence, the problems that we have. But the truth is, Mr. President, Barbadian courts were in essence applying Barbadian law akin to our own indigenous common law for many years. And Mr. President, I submit it is a pure and authentic source of law. So that is why I submit that the Barbadian courts were not getting it wrong, and I will beg to differ. And the government has taken a decision, is not going to argue with the courts. It will come to Parliament and make an amendment and validation to support the power of the courts to make interim payments by virtue of a statutory basis. But I beg to differ. And I want to use this opportunity, Mr. President, as to question the relevance of this notion that the common law, which we still accept as part of Barbados law, is the law until Parliament says otherwise. For example, we have a Defamation Act. The concept of defamation, we know in law, is not defined in the Defamation Act. It still uses the common law definition of defamation. But we have a Defamation Act. So we take sometimes the common law and codify it, pass laws, bring statutes, put them in place, but the statutes don't cover everything on that particular aspect of law. And we have to go where? We have to go to the English common law as the source of all law. And that, Mr. President, is problematic in that the reality, the lived reality of Caribbean people, the lived reality of Barbadians here cannot matter into the factoring in of what is essentially a basis to deal with a legal problem. So I submit, Mr. President, that Barbados law is good law. And what the Barbadian judges have been doing, I cannot find a decision in which a judge has given an order for interim payment where the claimant got an interim payment, and after the matter, the claimant lost the case and then has now to find the money to pay back the defendant. You don't find that because the judges have developed rules. The judges have developed a principled basis on which that order can be made. And that has been the case for 40-something years. So I don't accept that the Barbadian judges have got it wrong. Judge-made law does not only mean the law that comes from England. And there are some who believe that the Caribbean law or Barbados law is not a term, or sorry, is a term without meaningful context at a conceptual level. There's a view that outside of the English common law, there can be no judge-made law in the Caribbean. Our judges cannot rule unless the English common law or the English Parliament has addressed the matter. This is not so in other sectors of our society. But there's a line between the law and society, in spite of, as I said, independence, the existence of a law faculty. And in my consideration of this matter, Mr. President, I reread an article written by Dr. Leighton Jackson, former dean of the law faculty, for we law. And he questioned what has so stultified the movement for the emergence of laws, judicial decision-making, and institutional framework for the law, which reflects and responds readily and meaningfully to the realities of Caribbean societies. He asked that question, Mr. President. He cites a lack of commitment to the kinds of discourse, like here, and the argumentation in the courts to justify the meaning of our legal rules based on our own existential reality. And that is important it may seem dry and mundane to people, but think about it. The English common law cannot deal with the concept of a common law spouse. The English common law cannot deal with the concept of a chattel house. Chattel is any property that is not land. And it is not affixed to the land with any degree of annexation. So it is a chattel, it can be moved. So the landowner is not affected by the rights of the chattel house owner. That's the English law. But the reality in the Caribbean is that most people put on the toilet and bath at the back of the house in concrete and stone, or the ground sill is turned into a stone foundation at some stage in people's development, and therefore the wood house on top is still not affixed to the land with a degree of annexation. So that is why you see across the landscape wooden wall foundations without any house on top. But this is because our legal system has failed to appreciate the realities of Caribbean society. And I could move on to other examples. For example, Mr. President, the indigenous land rights in certain communities where they have the indigenous communities still living in the Caribbean, RIGHTS and the RITES don't necessarily collide with the concept of English law, because a Mayan cannot go in bellies and say that my ancestors were practicing sacramental rites on the 30,000 square mile area contiguous with Block A and Block B, because that doesn't exist within the concept of their cultural history. But when they come to the court cannot deal with it, and you find the CCJ is having to case manage and appeal at that level, because the concept of rights and rights, the two different concepts, can collide. And how are we as a Caribbean people still trying to use English law? So I say all of that against the backdrop that we have to be committed to a discourse and argumentation of our law. We accept, and the government accepts, the ruling of the court, and this is a perfect example of the rule of law in motion, that the courts will rule and the government accepts the ruling, and this is why we're putting it on a firm foundation. But I don't want young students or young lawyers to think that we are ever powerless to create legal solutions to our own lived realities, and that we must only accept the lived reality. And why that is dangerous, because we don't have this particular problem in Barbados, but there's a recent decision out of St. Lucia, where they have left in their law a provision that says that the law as developed by the Parliament of England in relation to certain things is the law of St. Lucia. And during the current Sable case, the English Parliament changed the law, and that automatically became the law of St. Lucia. And there's a well-known defamation case between the current Deputy Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, Hiller versus Chastanet. And if you read it, it is troubling to the extent that we have a sovereign Caribbean country to this day that still subjugates itself to the actual dictates of the present British Parliament as being able to create its own law in this time. Huh? That is a... No. So I want us to use these moments to reflect on the fact that we are people too. We have our own reality. And while the government is able to respond, we will not always be able to respond to situations where the courts are stuck with these lacunas and these challenges. Mr. President, if it is any time remaining, I will want to lend my voice to those calls for greater judicial accountability in the delivery of justice. Recently, the courts have had to award litigants hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages in relation to the failure of courts to deliver decisions in a timely manner. And it really is a block on the system of justice in Barbados, and we really ought to do better. I've seen a copy of the recent Judicial Council report, for 2025. And it gives a gloomy foreboding of what is to come, because in our Court of Appeal, there are 40 decisions outstanding from last year, and only 3 have been delivered. And that, again, is a troubling situation. Yes, I am one of the persons who would have argued matters before the Court of Appeal, but think about it, Mr. President. The very constitutionality of this chamber was brought before the courts in 2022. And since 2022, there is a Court of Appeal decision outstanding in that matter. And there are other matters that are still outstanding of equal nature. And if the Court of Appeal is as it is, what is it to say to the lower courts? And if the highest court is admonishing the judicial system in Barbados with the regularity that the CCJ is doing, and the government has put in place measures, more judges, more masters, to help deal with the workload, because the system has grown large exponentially. So the workload of judges has been tremendous, and acting judges to make sure that it can lighten the burden. But lawyers work hard to present and prepare their cases and present their arguments, both in writing and orally. And the law of the land is that a decision really should not take more than 6 months to be delivered. The people require justice, and timely justice. And really, it is time that we, as a parliament and part of the executive, and this is not what some commentators might say, Senator Nichols is not criticizing the judiciary. And if that may be so, I'm right to do so, because we are a co-equal branch of the state. And all of the branches have to be accountable. And the Judicial Council is the mechanism which looks at the judiciary. But at the same time, this Parliament must send a strong signal that if the resources are not being allocated for the efficient running of the system, then we have a problem. So we need to address that. But at the same time, you cannot sit down for years, 7 years, to determine simple matters, not even a substantive trial. It is not fair to litigants to keep them. And I use this as an opportunity, Mr. President, to really ask for some more accountability on the part of the judiciary to ensure that ordinary people get justice in this country. It cannot be a situation. Mr. President, I can tell you there are decisions outstanding from 2008 in cases I've argued in 2008 that have not yet been delivered. I'm sure that the other legal members of the fraternity have similar time spans in matters, right? Assembly judges have retired, right? Right? So that we are not here trying to take care of our pocket. The truth is that we work for ordinary people in this country every day, right? No, but and who come to us, and it may seem simple, but it is the most complex, the most troubling matter in their lives. And if they come and ask you to deal with a matter, you deal with it. The least they expect is that the courts will tell them that they're right or they're wrong at some stage. So I cannot, Mr. President, let the opportunity go by in this debate not to call for greater accountability in relation to. As a practitioner, Mr. President, I can tell you, I will continue to make sure that we advocate for the rights of the people within the system of justice, to ensure that it continues to flow evenly and fairly so that all can have their day in court. This amendment, Mr. President, is timely. It is timely because it amends the law to make statutory provision for interim payments, puts it on a firm statutory grounding. It fills the void created by the decision of the Court of Appeal, but it also reignites the call for the discourse and argumentation for we law. I'm obliged to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Nichols. Senator Monique Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President.
for allowing me to speak. Mr. President, I believe that what I'm about to do is going to be historic because I don't think I've ever done it in all the time that I've been in this Senate. And I'm, like Senator Cummings said earlier, there are a few of us that were here from the beginning. We have an amendment before us that was laid, or it was read for the first time on the 4th of June, 2025. According to our order paper, it was published in the Official Gazette on the 19th of May, 2025. This amendment, as I understand it, arises from a case that started, it had a suit number of 2023, suit number being the number of the case. It started on the 12th of June, 2024, according to the written decision of the Court of Appeal of Barbados. And it was decided in January 22nd, sir, 2025. We here in June. That doesn't happen, Mr. President. So I, Monique C. Tate, hereby commend the Attorney General and his people for getting this amendment to Parliament in a short space of time. It's incredible. It really is incredible, and y'all really should be clapping for that because you don't understand the importance of this amendment, because the minute that this case was released into the public domain, Mr. President, trust and believe, and I have reports, it didn't happen to me, but I have colleagues who immediately were faced with challenges with certain insurance companies shutting down interim payments, shutting them down, not reducing them, shutting them down. So here's the problem with not getting an interim payment. And that's the, oh boy, that is why my tongue will not stick in the top of my mouth. I am going to commend the Attorney General, because when I saw the decision, I was like, Lord, what are we going to do? Things in Barbados take very long. If they take long with this, there are a lot of people who will be adversely affected. And we're not talking about scammers who do not have whiplash but wear a collar till it's black. If you see a black collar, that person does not have whiplash. I have had whiplash. I have 2 vertebrae out of line. I have been in serious accidents. When you have whiplash, you're not playing with a collar. You're wearing it because you need it. I was injured to the point where I could not lift my own head. So I was like this, and people had to lift my head and then put on the collar. So if you see a black one, that's a scammer. But there are people who are genuinely injured. They need interim payments for a number of reasons. Yes, Senator Nichols spoke about it, I think Senator Boyce. You need it for your medical expenses. You also need it to get to the taxi. You need it to buy your medical accessories, a wheelchair. You may have to pay to get your ergonomics sorted because you can no longer do certain things. You need 24-hour care. You need physiotherapy. You need aquatherapy. You need steam therapy. You need money. Now, here's the thing. Before you can get to the point of determining what your claim should be, you have to get to the point where a doctor can issue a medical report, a final medical report. Before you can get to a final medical report, you will get interim medical reports if you're lucky, but you have to be allowed to go through the process so that you can determine, is this person going to be healed or is this person going to have a permanent disability? So with me, if you watch me reverse, I don't look. I don't look around. I use my rearview mirrors because I can't. I have a permanent disability. You could not have determined that early into my injury. I had to go through a period of time. I mean, my matter though was unusual because my matter took 27 years because of the insurance company on the other side and the council. Should I call names? I will not. Ask me after. The reality is there are a number of reasons why you need an interim payment before you get to the point to be able to get a medical report, because we as council can only quantify your claim when we have a final medical report. So the person has to go through a series of medical treatments to get to that point. They need treatment at the same time. If somebody is injured and they can no longer work, they need money to live, they need money to help in their household, they need money, and if they're injured sufficiently badly, they need a nurse. 24-hour care is not cheap in any form. And if you are somebody who needs medication, you can't just have a sitter. You have to have somebody qualified to administer medication. So an interim payment is critical to care. It's critical to healing. So not to pay it is detrimental to the person who's not receiving it. It is unfortunate and abhorrent that there were insurance companies who were in the process of making interim payments who used the case to stop, notwithstanding the facts before them, because as Senator Nichols rightly said, interim payments don't start happening until liability is no longer an issue. So what's the problem? You have to pay it anyway. You're just paying it sooner rather than later. So yes, Senator Thompson, it's unethical. It's unprofessional. It's just plain unconscionable. It's inhumane. It's nasty. It's unfair. It's wrong. It's wrong. So coming back here in June for a decision that was issued in January, in our world, or at least to me, it's a big thing. And you can't not say, well, all right then, thanks. Now, having said that, let's talk about what's going to affect the joy of a 6-month amendment. Both Senator Nichols and Senator Boyce spoke about the problems in the system. I heard, I believe, Senator Cummings and Senator Morris talk about the additional judicial assistants, and we have additional judges, and we have a lot going on. But if we're not getting our decisions, it's no, having these people, it doesn't make sense. It's not helping. There is no reason why a decision should be outstanding as long as the one that Senator Nichols referred to. I have a brother who's an attorney who is waiting on a decision from a particular judge who has since retired. His applicants are in the late 90s. Does that, you understand where we're at? Or you might have a case where the witness is elderly, or even not elderly. If you're going through menopause, you're not going to remember what happened 15 minutes ago, far less 2 years ago. It's affecting justice when these things happen. It's taking too long. But I'm not going to sit here and point my finger at any judge. The judges are doing what they can. But the reality is, I've said it in here before, I will say it again. You cannot want a judge to give a decision in 6 months if they're doing 10 and 15 cases a day. It's not going to happen. They still have to have time to do the decisions. And if you're giving them judicial assistants who are not qualified to help them adequately, you're just spinning it out in mud because they still have to do the research. If you don't have enough judicial assistants where you have judges sharing a judicial assistant, the junior judge is going to suffer, not because the senior judge is mean, but because the senior judge gets to use the assistant over and above the junior judge unless he gives way or she gives way. The reality is that there needs to be, let me say it this way. If I was a judge, I do not want somebody straight out of law school. And no other reason than they don't have enough knowledge, experience, expertise, ability to assist me fully. They can come along for the ride, but they can't be my key person. I'm going to end up doing the work. If I have to do my research, I cannot do the decision. If I have to do a decision, I can't hear matters Monday to Friday. We cannot keep doing this. And then what happens is the clients blame the lawyers. And it doesn't matter how much we say, but we're waiting on a decision, we're waiting on the judge, we're waiting on the court. The pieces need to come together to make it make sense. You cannot have unqualified people working in a space where you need the best of the best. I believe that some kind of analysis needs to be done as to how the money is to be allocated and spent so that you have something that makes sense. If you I'm going to step on a limb here. I don't do as much court as I used to, so I'm going to say it. If you have judges who have outstanding decisions and they're due to retire, and they can retire without doing the decision, that's flawed. Because there are other parts of the jurisdiction, other jurisdictions where, in order for you to, you can retire, but in order for you to start receiving your retirement payment, you have to finish your judgments. Because in some cases, if you do not finish your judgment, the case got to start over. Seriously? That's what we're doing? And you've gone off into the sunset with your retirement? I'm not saying don't retire, I'm saying do your cases though. We have certain people who are out 20-something cases. That's not right. That's not fair. That's not fair to the lawyer. That's not fair to the claimant. That's not fair to the respondent. That's not fair to anybody. And I think the time has come for the relevant persons within the government to look at how we deal not only with the backlog, we say that all the time, backlog, backlog, backlog. We also have to look at what happens to a judge who is about to retire or who retires, and they don't finish the work, or change the legislation to make provision for somebody to come and read the notes up to that point, and only if the notes are taken in accordance with how, I think it was Senator Boyce or Senator Nichols, it has to be verbatim. You can't ask somebody to come in the middle and finish a case that they were not party to, but something has to happen, because retirement you can manage, but if the person gets ill, you can't manage that. The thing is to not let anybody get to the point where they have so many cases outstanding that if they get ill, it's a problem. You need to, while they're well, you need to let judges have the time to get their decisions done. How can you be having a court list that still has on 10 and 50 double digits? Either their cases are going to be done superficially or you're going to get a lot of adjournments. That does not help the backlog. And you need to give the Supreme Court registry the staff that it needs to get the job done. And it doesn't necessarily mean numbers. You need to get people who know what they're doing. Why do you keep moving people who have gotten it right? You move people who know what they're doing and bring people who know have to learn. Meanwhile, work is outstanding. It should never be that qualified litigators are saying they're going to stop litigating because the process is so flawed, so tedious. It should never be that probate and all of those matters that could generate income for the government in terms of fees are sitting there. It took me 3 years to get a letters testamentary for a gentleman that I did the will, and the problem was not one that should have required a 3-year wait. There's a problem, it needs to be addressed. I'm glad for this amendment as it relates to the interim orders. It needed to be, it's unfortunate that it needed to be made a law to get the insurance industry to do the right thing. And it's not all of them, but it only takes one to make it bad for all. And I had a number of colleagues call me complaining about it. So it's unfortunate that it was necessary, but big up the Attorney General for getting it done in 6 months. I'm obliged to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Tate. If there are no more speakers, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank the honorable senators who have spoken, Senator Kevin Boyce and Senator Gregory Nichols were in fine teaching form today, and I believe that the Senate and those who are listening to them benefited from measured, tempered, comprehensive, easy to understand presentations on how this legislation that is before this honorable chamber today collides, and I use Senator Nichols' word, collides with the existing legislation. We saw what I can at best describe as really a genuine legal masterclass from these two gentlemen in their presentations, and I want to commend them for their submissions to this honorable chamber. I want at this time, Mr. President, to be as brief in my wrap-up as I was in my presentation initially. Thank you also to Senator Monique Tate for her submission as well on the practical implications of the initial finding of the court and how it impacted people and their lives. And with these very few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
The Honorable the Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 1 do now stand part.
Question is that clause 1 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 2 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 2 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 3 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 3 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 4 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 4 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 5 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 5 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Supreme Court of Judicature Amendment and Validation Act of 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Supreme Court of Judicature Amendment and Validation Act 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, that brings us to the end of government business for the day, and I beg to move that the sitting of the Senate be adjourned sine die.
The question is that this sitting of the Honorable Senate be adjourned sine die. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. This sitting is accordingly adjourned sine die.